Hey, it's Katie, and welcome back to my booktube channel. Today's video is my September wrap-up, and this one's going to be a little longer because I read 22 books this month, which is insane. That's 10 more books than I typically read in a month, and I owe all of that to the fact that I got a Kindle at the end of August, and I also got Kindle Unlimited, so literally 20 out of these 22 books were ebooks that I read, and I was flying through them, so that's why I read so much. But I had a great time, and I'm super excited to tell you guys about all the books that I read this month. I will try to move through them pretty quick because there are so many, but with me reading 22 books, I also read almost 9,000 pages, which is like 3,000 more than I typically read, and I just can't even wrap my head around that. I almost read a book every single day this month. So I'm feeling pretty good about my reading progress, and yeah, let's just jump into it. The first book I read this month was The Wall of Winnipeg and Me by Mariana Zapata, and this was my first Mariana Zapata book, but definitely not my last. I am obsessed with her writing, and this book is a football romance, so it follows Vanessa, who is the assistant slash housekeeper for one of the top defensive ends in the National Football Organization, and basically this was just supposed to be a temporary position for her, and she's not feeling very appreciated within this position, so she just decides to quit. She says, I'm not going to feel bad about it, he doesn't treat me very well, I'm just going to quit. And she's very surprised the next day to find Aiden at her door, and he basically begs her to come back and work for him, and she's completely caught off guard because he can't even be bothered to say good morning to her or answer any of her questions. So she's very caught off guard. And this book is so good. It's a slow burn. It's one of the best slow burns I've ever read in my life. It's like a super, super slow romance, but in the best way. There's like so much tension and these little moments throughout the book that just add up into this like really beautiful romance that you get to watch unfold. And also, I love football, so I was really excited to find a football romance to read, and you definitely do get some of those elements in there as well. Some other tropes that this includes is also marriage of convenience and grumpy sunshine, so if you like those as well, this would be a book for you. But basically, this book just made me fall in love with Mariana Zapata's writing, and I plan to read basically everything else that she ever puts out. I was loving football romances, so after that I moved on to Trick Play by Jerica McMillan. So this one was a rival's little sister romance, and it follows Cal, who this was supposed to be his year as quarterback on the football team. He was supposed to have a great time. I think it's his senior year actually, and all of a sudden there's a transfer student who ends up taking the starting position, so obviously he is not very happy about that. But he tries to keep proving himself at practice to his coach to be like, hey, I should be the starter, but that doesn't work, so he creates a new plan, and that is to get close to his teammate's little sister and to kind of take his teammate down that way. This one definitely has bad boy vibes, so if you enjoy that, this one might be for you. Also, it basically has like casual sex that turns into more, so if that's something that interests you, go for this one. But this one doesn't have as much football as The Wall of Winnipeg has, so I was a little disappointed. I felt like this would have included a lot more of the football elements because that seemed to play such a big part in his life, but you still get a little bit, but it's just not as much as I was hoping, so that was like a tiny bit disappointing. But overall, I did appreciate that more and more depth was added to the relationships as the story progressed. Next up is one of the only two physical books I read this month, and that is These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan. I got this in my Fairy Loot box last month, and I was super excited to dive into this one because it is pitched as The Cruel Prince meets ACOTAR, and I'm sure everybody's heard of those two series, so it made me really excited to read another Fae romance. Our main character, Bree, would choose anything over making a deal with Fae, even death. But then her sister is taken by the king of the Unseelie court, and Bree will do whatever it takes to get her back. She ends up making a deal with the king himself to steal 3 magical relics from the rival Seelie court. Bree ends up choosing to pose as a potential bride for Prince Ronan of the Sealy court, and he ends up not being as wicked as she once thought. Unwilling to let her heart distract her, she ends up accepting help from a band of unseelie misfits with a secret of their own. But as Bree spends more and more time with their seductive leader Finn, she ends up falling for his charm. So as you guys can tell, this does include a love triangle between people from 2 different fae courts. So that's really interesting. I feel like the love triangle was done pretty well. And also just all the fantasy elements in the world building was really, really interesting. And I loved this book just as much as I hoped I would. And I'm really excited to read the rest of the series. It sucks that this book just came out because I feel like we're going to have to wait for so long for the next book and I'm super impatient. But I definitely recommend this to you guys if you're looking for a fae romance. Next up, we have Playing with Fire by L.J. Shen. And this follows Grace and West, who are polar opposites. Grace is the strange girl from the food truck who is basically invisible to everybody around her. And West is an underground fighter who is the popular bad boy in the community. And he ends up like thrusting himself into Grace's life, and it definitely shakes things up a little bit. The synopsis of this one reminded me of a like bad boy underground fighter book I loved when I was younger, and I had a lot of hope for this one, but something about it just didn't quite click for me and I ended up not really enjoying it. But I did really like Grace's development throughout the book. I feel like she ended up way more confident by the end, and it was really nice to see her grow as a character. There were some sweet moments between Grace and West, but overall I didn't really care too much about the romance, and I honestly kind of had to force myself to finish this one, which I always feel bad saying, but this is one I probably wouldn't recommend to anybody. My next read was Inevitable by Kristen Granada, and this was one I actually saw on Book Talk. It's one of those ones where you don't realize it's a Book Talk video, and it just seems like something that the person making the Book Talk experienced, and then at the end it's like, if you want to know more, read this book. And so I was really caught off guard and added it to my TBR immediately. I think I actually started reading it on Kindle Unlimited like as soon as I saw that TikTok. So I was super excited, and this is actually like a forbidden romance where the guy is posing as a bodyguard for the daughter of this wealthy man. And basically, he's posing as a bodyguard because his plan is to get in, get what he needs, and get out. And it's kind of gives like mafia vibes, but I don't know if I don't think it's technically the mafia, but it kind of gives those similar vibes. And it was definitely interesting. It was kind of rushed because it's only like a 200-page book, so I really enjoyed what we were given. I just feel like the romance and the plot was kind of rushed through, and I wish it was just maybe like 100 pages longer so we could really dive into some of these things, because I felt like the main characters had a lot of chemistry. I feel like they really understood each other on a much deeper emotional level, and it was really nice to see them connect and understand each other that way. But like I said, it was a little bit rushed, so definitely could have been a little bit better. After that, I picked up the other physical book I read this month, which was Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. I read It Ends With Us last month and fell in love with Colleen Hoover's writing, so I wanted to pick up another one, and I've definitely seen this one all over the book community, as I'm sure you guys have as well. This follows Tate and Miles, who don't really hit it off when they first meet. They end up not really getting along, but there's still this undeniable, like, sexual attraction to each other, and so they decide to have a casual relationship, except Miles has 2 rules for Tate, and she needs to follow them in order to keep this casual relationship going. That is to never ask questions about his past and to never expect a future. They both think that they can handle this until their hearts kind of get infiltrated and feelings get woven into the mix, and it makes things a little more complicated than they expected. I wasn't really sure what to expect with this one because It Ends With Us broke me on a level that no other book has done before, and I was really worried that this book would break me again, and thankfully it didn't, but it was still so well written. The writing is so good. I was so invested in the characters, and just their relationship together, and I couldn't put it down. I read this one in one sitting again. I feel like Colleen Hoover is definitely going to be one of my favorite authors this year, and I definitely see what all the hype is about. Also, I did really enjoy the flashbacks that were in here, and I thought the spice was so good. I loved the variety and the different types of spicy scenes, so I'm definitely excited to pick up more Colleen Hoover. I probably won't read any this month for Holo Reads, but I'm hoping to read November 9 on November 9th, so we'll see if I remember to do that, but that is my goal. That should be the next Colleen Hoover book that I read. Next up is my least favorite book that I read this month, and that is The Society Stalker Problems by Ivy Smoke. And I've recognized this author's name, but I had never read a book by her before, and so I was really excited to pick this one up. It was pitched as something that was her steamiest book yet, and that made me really excited for it. But I ended up really not liking it. Also, the only thing that you get as the synopsis is that this girl gets a letter from this illicit club, and basically it says that they can grant her 3 wishes as long as she signs their contract, and that's all you know going into it. And that's still really all I know about it, even after I read it, because I was so confused. This entire book was so confusing. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't really enjoy the romance, and I didn't think it was that steamy. I didn't really see that much spice at all, and again, I was just so confused. I just left not really understanding what was happening. I really wanted to DNF it, but I was hoping that something would happen that would make me fall in love with it, but it really didn't, and I really didn't like our main character because she was so embarrassing and cringy, and I did not enjoy it at all. Also, I feel like this book should have some trigger warnings, but it doesn't, so definitely maybe read some reviews for trigger warnings before going into this book if you are going to give it a chance, but I don't recommend reading it, so maybe skip this one if you're not sure. I forgot that I did have another physical book I read, and that is The Goal by Elle Kennedy. This is the 4th book in the Off-Campus series, which is a college hockey romance series, and I've read all the other ones. I've talked about them before. I really enjoy Elle Kennedy's writing and this friend group that we get to keep learning more and more about. This book follows Sabrina and John Tucker, and they end up having a one-night stand together that kind of turns into more and then ends up being an accidental pregnancy, and usually that's a trope I stay away from because it's not something I think I really enjoy, but I love these characters so much and this series so much that I decided to give it a chance anyway, and I did kind of enjoy it. I still think it's a trope that I will probably avoid if possible, but I think it was done really well in this, and I ended up really enjoying this story. Oh, also, the smut in this is great. It was probably my favorite smut out of the entire series, so I feel like that's reason enough to pick this one up. So I actually made the mistake of starting Shameless King by Maya Hughes on my Kindle at the same time I was reading The Goal, and the problem with that is the fact that they are both college hockey romances, and there was a little bit of confusion because I was doing that, and I ended up having to take a break from Shameless King for a little bit so I could finish The Goal and then dive back in. So I don't think my reading experience was as good as it should have been. But basically, Shameless King, like I said, is another college hockey romance, and basically these characters knew each other in high school. They never really got along. I can't remember if there was like an incident or something that made them dislike each other, or if they just always kind of would butt heads. I'm not really sure, but they end up being paired as lab partners in college, and obviously that forces them to work together, and it means a lot because she is a great student and he isn't doing too well in some of his classes, so he is not allowed to play on the hockey team until he fixes his grades. So it's very important to both of them that they make it work. Other than it really being confusing because I was reading the Off-Campus series, I feel like if you do like the Off-Campus series, this might be another one that you would enjoy because it does give similar vibes, and also I feel like it has a good balance of hockey, romance, and some spice. This book is kind of pitched as enemies to lovers, and it does have that element in it, but it's a more chill version. It's not as like intense, and still has banter, but not to the degree I usually look for in enemies to lovers, but it's definitely still enjoyable. The next one I read was a fantasy called Bloodlike Magic by Lascelles Sambury, And this one I was really excited to read because it came out a few months ago and it looked super good. It's a like rich, dark urban fantasy, and it follows a teenage witch who is forced to make this really difficult choice. She ends up having to kill her first love to save her family's magic. The problem with this is the fact that she's never been in love, so she basically has to try to find the perfect guy to fall in love with and then kill, which is definitely just as messy as you could expect. I loved this book. It was so good. I thought I would enjoy it, but I enjoyed it way more than I even expected. Before you dive into it though, make sure you do check the trigger warnings. There are the content trigger warnings in the front of the book. I appreciate that the author made sure to do that. But go ahead and read that list before you dive in, because there are a lot of really tough, like dark elements to it, and it's done so well. I feel like it's written so eloquently and it's talked about in such a tasteful way that I think it's still really worth the read, but just make sure you're aware of those content warnings before you dive in. I'm pretty sure that I did a full book review for Bloodlike Magic, so if you're interested in that, I will link that for you guys, but go ahead over there to hear more of my thoughts on this really great fantasy book. After that, I had the privilege of reading an arc of Not Your Average Hawkeye by Gwenda Bond, and this synopsis sounds so crazy. This is basically like a contemporary romance mixed with fantasy elements as well, and like paranormal elements. It's like the coolest concept I've heard in a while. Basically, it follows a girl who promises her mom that she can take care of the family's escape room while her mom's away for the weekend, except all of a sudden this like satanic cult shows up and says that a book that they're using as a prop is actually like this relic that they can use to summon the devil. And she doesn't believe them because she's like, what the heck, it's just a prop, I don't know what you're talking about. But they end up like essentially taking her with them and doing this ritual and summoning the Prince of Hell on accident, and his name is Luke. He decides to basically work with our main character to stop the satanic cult from destroying the world, basically, and our main character has no idea that Luke is the Prince of Hell, and so they're just working together. There's tons of banter, and there's some sweet moments in there as well, but she has no idea that's who she's working with the entire time. And it all happens over the course of a couple days before the mom comes home from her trip. And it's like this whirlwind of all these crazy events, but it's still like light and fun, like a romantic comedy. And it's the most interesting mashup I've ever read. I think my favorite part of the story was the fact that we were able to go to hell with Luke and see all these different elements of hell that we might have heard about in like Greek mythology. I think we end up meeting his mom, who I cannot think of right now. But I remember really enjoying seeing her, and also we have to pass a river that I've also heard of. I don't know why I'm forgetting, probably because I've read over 20 books this month, so they're all getting like blurred together, but I really enjoyed seeing all the elements of hell, and I think you guys will too. Next, I ended up reading a reverse harem series, and it was called The Academy of Stardom. So the books were Freestyle, Lyrical, Breakers, and Finale, I think, if I remember correctly. And like I said, this was my very first reverse harem, so I was not sure if I would enjoy it or not, but I ended up enjoying the series a lot. It also incorporates a lot of dance elements, and I love reading stories with different hobbies and things like dance, so it was really cool. And basically, this follows a girl who used to be part of a dance crew when she was younger. She kind of grew up in a really rundown area, didn't have a good childhood, and she found this group of guys who were in a dance crew, and she loved dancing, so they ended up becoming really good friends and having this really great crew together until one night where they kind of all broke each other's hearts and made this decision to kind of walk away from each other, and basically they hadn't seen each other in 3 years since. But now our main character has a scholarship to a dance academy, and she's super excited. This is her chance to get away from her crappy home life, and when she gets there, she ends up bumping into all of the guys from her dance crew that kind of broke her. And so it's definitely a ton of tension, and anger that they all have to work through, and it's just really cool to see how each of the relationships develop in their own way. They each have their own timeline and their own things to work through, and it was really nice to see. Also, there's some great friendships in here, and again, a ton of dancing. I really love that element too, because our characters really showed what they were going through internally through their dance, so it was really fun to try to picture what the dance would look like. The next one I read was one of my favorite reads this month, and that was Wait For It by Mariana Zapata. Again, this was a phenomenal slow burn romance, and it actually follows a character we kind of got to know from The Wall of Winnipeg and Me, so that was really cool to finally get to know her a little bit better. But this follows Diana, who is trying really, really hard to be an adult and get her life together, because 2 years ago she was given guardianship over her nephews after her brother died, and she's really trying to figure out how to be a good guardian for them. And she just bought a house and ends up living across the street from this really handsome stranger who ends up being the youth baseball coach for one of her nephews. Diana had so much chemistry with the love interest in this book. It was so great. There was so much tension, and like I said, it was a slow burn, so it was really great to get those little tidbits leading up to them finally being together, and you got to see how it progressed from them not really getting along to really, really caring about each other. And there was like the cutest little family. Diana and those two boys were so sweet. The way they all loved each other and cared for each other and tried to help each other heal, and adding the love interest into that mix. They were such a cute family, and I just wanted to sit there and like cry because they were so adorable, and I just wanted to like hug all of them. I love all those characters so much, and I never wanted that book to end. After that, I read Throttled by Lauren Asher, and this is a Formula One racing romance where our main character ends up falling for her brother's rival. So basically, her brother ends up being asked to join this new racing team and ends up having to be teammates with his rival, and they really hate each other because of something that happened in a competition or in a race a few years prior, something like that. And so they really don't get along, but his sister, our main character, ends up going with him on their tour of all the races because she just graduated from college. She's trying to figure out what she wants to do, so she decides she's going to go along with him and vlog the entire journey and make like a YouTube channel and all that stuff. So she ends up going to all of their events and races and keeps bumping into her brother's rival, and obviously they end up falling for each other. It kind of took me a while to get into this book because I'd never read a Formula One racing book before, but I actually ended up really enjoying it. I liked learning more and more about racing, and I definitely will probably continue this series. I feel like it was done really well, and I'm excited because the rest of the series are companion novels that deal with other teammates that we got to meet in Throttled. So I think that is really cool, and they had some good chemistry together. I feel like the romance was done pretty well. Things like this stress me out though, because obviously they kept it a secret from her brother, and I am always scared for him to find out and the whole fallout that happens. That kind of gives me a little bit of anxiety, so I was a little nervous about that, but I did enjoy this book. The next books I read were all part of the Ruthless Games trilogy by Callie Rose. There was Sweet Obsession, Sweet Retribution, and Sweet Salvation. This was another reverse harem series, and I also did really enjoy this one. So basically this follows Ayla, who made a split decision 2 years ago to save this stranger's life, and she's been trying to move on and forget about that incident ever since, but the guy she saved, Marcus, he has never been able to forget. He basically has been watching her and kind of obsessing over her since then, and he ends up like barreling into her life a few years later, and she wants nothing to do with him. She's like, look, please leave me alone. It was an accident. I didn't really mean to save your life. Like, go away. And he's like, no, like our souls are bonded now because you saved me. My heart beats for you. I owe you all of these heartbeats because you saved my life. And reading that synopsis, that last part is what drew me in. The fact that he's like, all of my heartbeats are for you. I was like, oh, okay. But that last part of the synopsis is really what drew me in. The fact that he feels like their souls are bonded because she saved his life all those years ago. It was such an interesting premise to me, and I was interested to see how that turned into a reverse harem. But it was done really well. I feel like there was a good amount of tension and action in here. The series kind of took a turn and started focusing more on some action and a different element than I was expecting. I don't want to tell you guys about it because I feel like it's a spoiler, but I really enjoyed it. It wasn't what I was expecting, but it was a pleasant surprise. And also, I think there is some really great disability rep in here because of our main character, which again, you will find out if you read it, but I think it was done really, really well, and she was a pretty badass heroine. After that, I read Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa, and this follows Lena, who is a wedding planner who got left at the altar, which is super ironic, but now she's just trying to focus on her business and move on. On the other hand, we have Max, who's trying to make his mark with this coveted hotel, and he ends up having to work with Lena to accomplish that. The only problem with this is that Max is the one who convinced his brother to leave Lena at the altar all those years ago. I thought this was a pretty cute romantic comedy. I ended up taking like a week-long break in the middle of reading this just because I got really busy and was reading a bunch of books on my Kindle, so I didn't really get the full effect of this book, which is totally my fault, but I thought it was super cute. I enjoyed all the moments that I saw in it. I thought there was pretty decent chemistry between Lena and Max, and also some pretty good banter and like emotional development, so I think it's pretty cute. And last but not least, I was able to read an arc of The Mistletoe Pact by Joe Lovett, which comes out October 1st, which is super soon, and this basically follows Dan and Evie, who 8 years ago made this pact under the mistletoe that if they were still single when they hit 30, that they would marry each other. And now it's 8 years later, and it's right before Evie's 30th birthday. They are in Vegas together, they end up getting super drunk, and they wake up the next morning married, not really remembering how it happened. I expected this book to be super, super Christmassy because it's called The Mistletoe Pact. It has a Christmassy cover, but it honestly doesn't have that much Christmas in it. It has little tidbits throughout and some pivotal moments that take place during Christmas time, but most of the book takes place during other parts of the year, so just keep that in mind before picking it up. But I don't think that really took too much away from the story. It was just a little disappointing because I'm like obsessed with Christmas. Also, this seems like a super, super slow burn romance, but I'm kind of picky with the type of slow burn romance that I like, and I need to have a lot of tension and buildup before they end up getting together, and I don't think that was really the case with this one. I feel like because these chapters kind of alternated between the past and the present, we really didn't see Dan and Evie together too much, so there wasn't as much buildup as I would have liked, and the romance didn't hit as hard, but I do still think that it was pretty enjoyable, and if you're not as picky as I am with your slow burn romances, I think this is still worth the read. Okay, so we finally reached the end of my September wrap-up. If you made it this far, thank you for bearing with me. I know it was a long video. I had a ton of books I read this month, but I really enjoyed talking about all of them with you. I hope you found some new books to read, and I really appreciate it if you did make it this far. I'm super excited for Holo Reads coming up. My next video will be the very first Holo Reads video. It will be my spooky October TBR, so stay tuned for that. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. I would really, really appreciate it if you guys did. And if you do subscribe, click the notification bell so you know when I upload next. Thank you guys so much for watching. I can't wait to see you in my next video.